Man, that book blew my mind. It changed my life. And they talked about every business owner has three personalities battling within him: the entrepreneur, the technician, and the manager.
Right.
And that those three personalities are always within conflict with one another, and one of them is in too much control.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lij Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. Hello, Rockstars. It's your host, Lij Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, the podcast bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Chris Graham, a Billboard charting musician, producer, mixer, and mastering engineer. Chris works from his own mastering studio, Chris Graham Mastering, in Columbus, Ohio. Chris came across my radar one day when I was looking for a YouTube video about a new plugin, and before the video started, an ad popped up. Of course, I'm used to seeing ads about cars or plugins or whatever trendy item Google thinks I should know about, but this one was unexpected. Here was a normal guy talking to me on the screen about the frustrations of trying to master and mix my own record, how he understood and how he could help. So out of curiosity, I clicked through and landed on his website, chrisgrahammastering.com. I was so impressed with how he had laid everything out, how he presented his before and after player for mixing and mastering examples, that I decided to send him an email and introduce myself. Chris and I got on the phone, talked for a while, and I knew right away that he was someone that you would want to meet, rock stars. Chris has figured out how to build a thriving mixing and mastering business that really over-delivers by offering coaching, mentoring, and video tutorials to help his clients get the best mixes possible before the mastering process. And he does all this from the heartland of Ohio, not from New York City, not from Los Angeles, not Nashville, but he's built a smart, effective marketing and business strategy that allows him to help as many people as possible using the internet to connect with his clients. I'm really excited to dig deep into mixing and mastering and find out what makes an effective marketing and business strategy for you, rock stars. Please welcome Chris Graham to Recording Studio Rockstars. Chris, my friend, are you ready to rock?
I am, Lij. I'm very ready.
Dude, welcome to the show, man. It's really nice to have you on here. I had a great chat with you on the phone before this, but I'm excited to dig in and learn more about you.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I'm really excited to be on.
Well, so tell us, this is kind of an oddball question I like to ask, but we want to know more about how you got started. I've given my intro, but we want to dig in deeper. When you were starting out in recording, what did it smell like to you?
It smelled good. It smelled very good. The studio I worked in, people smoked pipes, so everything smelled delicious all the time.
Nice, man, nice.
But yeah, so when I first got into recording, I was real young, maybe 15 or 16 or 17. And I traded in my marching band trumpet. I decided not to be a marching band anymore at a local guitar shop. And I bought a 4-track cassette recorder. It was a Tascam X100 or something like that. I don't remember the model name. Mm-hmm. But I recorded a song. I was a singer, songwriter. Recorded a song, acoustic guitar, vocals and stuff. And then I brought it to my brother, who was like a computer expert. And I was like, man, I want to put this on the internet. How do I make it digital? And he mastered my first song. And he was a few years younger and, put reverb and fanciness on my first recording. And I put it on the internet. And the next morning I woke up and 160 people had listened to it. And wow, man, I was hooked. Just the idea that you could create art, that you could create media and put it out there in the world and it would talk for you while you weren't there just blew my mind. And I just sort of never looked back. And from there, a couple of years later, I went to college and got a job at a recording studio, and I majored in audio production as well. But really the job at the recording studio was what made all the difference, because I could show up in the middle of the night when nobody had booked it and experiment. And just learn what compression was and learn which microphones I liked and which preamps sounded better with which mics Yeah, so a lot of it was just getting in the studio and experimenting. And then sort of my story is, in college, I went to OU in Athens, Ohio University.
Mm-hmm.
And they had just the most amazing music scene down there, especially for songwriters. And there was an open mic, a really good open mic, just about every night of the week, 5-6 nights a week. And so you'd go to these and there'd be these little communities of songwriters that would help you improve and help you perform better and help you write better. And it was amazing. So I started recording a lot of my own music, and I became something of a local celebrity and put out a CD and started touring a little bit. And, this was back in 02 or 03, back when people were still buying full CDs if they liked one song.
Yeah.
And so it was like the golden age, I felt like, where I would, show up as a 20-year-old and play some songs for people on my guitar and, use my pedals to make loops and stuff. And then people would throw their money at me at the end of the show. And I went from, being super poor to being able to have a cell phone and a car, and basically just, sunk all the money back into recording equipment and then started.
So you could be super poor again.
Yeah, exactly. So I took all the money and bought recording equipment and built a portable studio. And basically I would show up at my clients' houses and we'd set up in a guest bedroom and I'd make a record for them. And it was great. It was a way for us to provide a great product at a really affordable price. And so I did that for a bunch of years and, it went very well. But I was, it was tough. It was a very, you hit the nail on the head. I sunk all my money back into recording equipment so I could be poor again. Bottom line, I'd be mixing and producing for clients, and inevitably you'd have that client that would say, you'd get done with the record and say, all right, well, we need to hire this guy to master it, this other guy. And they'd say, oh, I spent all my money on you. I don't have any money for mastering.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and it happens. So it's this groan of like, oh my gosh, I have to master this myself.
Yeah.
This is going to be awful. So just kind of going through, the trenches, mastering my own mixes really stretched me. And eventually I started mastering for other producers in town. And the word got around, hey, Chris is really good at this, a heck of a lot better than he is at producing. And I didn't know it, but I didn't have the interpersonal skills requisite to be nice to people in the studio.
Oh no.
and encourage them. I was, more of like a football coach producer of like, you could do this.
Do it again.
One more take. And that worked with some clients, but most it just was sort of off-putting and, just a result of me being immature. Anyways, so people started hiring me to master. And my mentor, this guy named Chris Pyle, who owned the studio that I worked at in Athens, Ohio, told me one day, dude, you could do this for a living. You're really good at this. And I was like, oh, cool, thanks. But I don't believe you. There's no way I could do this for a living. And I continued to master professionally, but I was, doing all of it. I would master for people. I'd mix for people. I'd produce, I'd record for people. And this is years and years ago. This is more than a decade ago. Eventually I had the idea for my website with that little before and after player, where you'd press play on a song and you could flip back and forth between something that hadn't been mastered and something that I had mastered.
It's so cool. It's the best one I've ever seen, man.
Thanks, man. Well, it was the first one. I had to have that custom built. But I knew as soon as I came up with the idea for that, I was like, holy crap, I could start a business and do just mastering. And so I started it and started advertising and started, telling my friends, hey, this is what I'm doing. And right about the same time, an artist named John Rubin, who at one point or another was the biggest selling Christian rapper in the world. He wasn't happy with his mastering engineer, and I sort of snuck in there and said, let me do a free demo for you guys. And I won him as a client and just sort of, took off from there.
Nice.
So yeah, it was sort of this weird, I had an idea on how to market myself, and that made the skill that I had viable because I could get the word out. So yeah, I'll never forget when strangers started hiring me for the first time. It was bonkers.
That's so cool, man. Well, I know this is way back to the beginning of your story, but I love the fact that you shared a story about a 4-track, and it was also totally crossed over with the digital age. It was like, I got a 4-track, and I'm picturing, way back, and you're like, and then my brother uploaded it to the internet for me, and I got a bunch of plays.
Yeah, well, it was weird. It was just at that time, like no one, there was no GarageBand. You had Pro Tools free back then, so you I think had 8 tracks.
That's right. Yeah, maybe even 4 tracks or something. But
maybe. Oh, it was awful.
But it was so exciting. You know, it's like the first time the digital arrived, the fact that you could do anything at all just was mind blowing and exciting.
Yeah. So I kind of cut my teeth right when digital became accessible. When you could actually, and this was mp3.com was what I posted it on. This was the first online music sharing webpage that I'm aware of.
Mm-hmm.
It's since out of business, but when it showed up, people just sort of lost their minds. It was before MySpace. It was before Facebook.
Before Napster.
Before Napster. Yeah. Before iTunes, before everything. So, yeah, it was a trip. It was really cool to sort of be on the cutting edge of that, so to speak. And it was addicting.
It's exciting that you did it and that you actually were able to measure the listens like that. I mean, just reaching 160 people overnight or whatever it was, figuratively overnight, is a pretty cool feeling back then. And now it still is, honestly. I mean, when I launched this podcast, by the time I had 160 listens, I was thrilled.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And that to me really drives everything for me, that fascination with media. And it was the same 100 years ago with books. You could write something and then people would publish it. And at any given moment of any given day, someone was reading what you were writing or listening to, once recorded media came along, listening to what you recorded. And that's a cool place to be. You can exist in more than one place at one time.
Yeah, I just did an interview with Roger Mutno, which is going to be should be airing just before this one. And one of the things we did to launch it was to play his Edison cylinder player. So he
cool.
launched the needle on that, and we played back some music right off the cylinder. It got me digging around on eBay already to see, whether I could get one of those.
I've always wanted one.
They're really
I've looked
cool.
at them. Yeah,
they're cool. Well, so Chris, again, it's a real pleasure to have you on the show here. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I'm definitely going to jump back and dig more into the details. But before we do, I'd like to ask our guests to share an inspirational quote, something to get us kind of kicking off the show and excited about recording.
It's going to be so lame of me to quote myself, but I was talking to my wife this morning. We have a 1-year-old daughter who is right on the edge of walking. She's really coordinated, so she never sort of falls over. And as a result, she's not walking yet. And I kind of commented to my wife, when our boys we have 2 older sons, when they learned to walk, it was out of a mistake. They fell forward just a little bit and caught themselves. That was their first step. And I said to her, boy, even walking starts with a mistake. So that's my quote. Even walking starts with a mistake.
Well, I like falling forward too. That's a really great.
Yeah, for sure.
It's a great image for how to move into the things we need to do next.
Yeah.
So even walking starts with a mistake.
Yeah. And I think, back to my story with, starting my business, I don't even know how many mistakes I made. I was stupid enough to think I could do it and to start a business, and it worked. And, I get to do what I love and master music all day, every day for a living, and, work with artists and see art come to life. It's a blast.
Well, it's a cool thing, and I have to say, like I described, my introduction to you was to sort of experience what I would call your marketing funnel. You invited me in using the internet, using advertising to come check out what you do. And then you really impressed me. And, if I needed my record to be mastered, I would be very inclined to call you up, through this,
awesome.
The way you presented yourself. And I think that that's really cool. But at the same time, you seem very advanced about it and very together. And it's great to hear that it's a reminder that, you have to go through all these mistakes and that there's real trial and error before you get to that point. I think sometimes, I still feel like I'm doing it wrong if I'm up against uncertainty and failures. But the truth is, no matter where we are with our business or with our art, with our mixing and mastering, we're always up against some sort of failure that we're having to solve and figure out. We have to make mistakes. If you want to share with us a little bit of your experience. What were some important failures for you along the way in order to get to this place where you're at now?
Yeah, well, for me, the most difficult, I'm going to get right to the core of, I think, what's difficult about being a mastering engineer. The most difficult thing, and I think it's the same with being a live sound engineer, with being a tracking engineer, with being a mixing engineer, is this idea that you want to get identity from people. You want people to say, that guy, Chris Graham, is a good mastering engineer. And it's the same if you're playing football on a high school team, you want that identity as the man. And what I found, and what was really difficult to overcome when I first started out, was I'd start mastering for someone I did know, and who was a friend of mine, and I wanted to impress them. And that desire to impress them and to get identity from doing kick-ass work made me a bad engineer. I would make this, I'd make these decisions of, I'm gonna hype everything above 10K by 5 dB, and then
50 million.
Yeah, then I'm going to parallel compress it and create a custom exciter with the distortion of, all these fancy schmancy things that were fun to do, but didn't make the record sound better. Mm-hmm. And so the big mistake that I made many, many times was, dude, this needs to be a spiritual thing when you're working on someone's record, and you need to do what you think needs to be done to make it sound better everywhere, not to just impress them with smoke and mirrors. Mm-hmm. And to say, well, I'm going to make it louder. I'm going to, 50 dB of gain reduction on my limiter, like that effort to impress and to get identity from what I'm doing for a living made it almost impossible to get hired again, because you weren't giving the people what they wanted. You were just trying to impress them. And what I've found over the years is that mistake is not something I'm over. If an old friend comes in the door and wants their record mastered, I have to very much talk myself down and be like, I'm going to do a good job on this, but I don't care what they think about me. I'm going to do what I think this record needs, not try to get them to think more highly of me in the process. And the inevitable conclusion of that was that they love the record, and then they hire me again and again and again and tell their friends. So yeah, that's always the biggest mistake, I feel like. Well,
it's almost like you described, it's better for them to like the results of your mastering and the record rather than for you to focus on hoping that they'll like you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's the primary sin of, ego, that you're focused on, I want more ego, I want more ego, I want more ego, instead of, I want to make beauty. I want to make beauty. So yeah, that was a very tough thing for me to overcome, and is still something that haunts me. There's a great book called The E-Myth Revisited.
Oh yeah, I'm just reading it right now.
Oh, no way.
Yeah.
Man, that book blew my mind. It changed my life. And they talked about, I'm sure you did this part already, where he talked about every business owner has 3 personalities battling within him: the entrepreneur, the technician, and the manager.
Right.
And that those 3 personalities are always within conflict with one another, and one of them is in too much control. Either the entrepreneur is taking crazy risks and doing bonkers, things, or the technician is like getting too focused on, but this vocal needs to be 0.1 dB louder, or the manager is faster, or whatever. So it's, balancing those personalities. And I feel like for me, and I think for probably most people that would identify themselves as an audio engineer, that technician personality.
Oh, yeah. That's exactly what I was going to say too.
He's an asshole. Go ahead.
Well, I totally agree with you. I mean, I think, and I was going to also speculate that our listeners, the rock stars, are probably primarily dealing with the technician first, because as audio engineers, producers, even musicians, we gravitate toward that. And I think there's something about being a technician that also says, like, if I don't want to deal with things, I'm more comfortable just kind of hunkering away with my computer and my 2 speakers and kind of tweaking things and working on it a little harder.
Yeah, putting your nose to the grindstone and ignoring the world around you.
But it's a challenge. So rock stars, again, to sort of clarify this concept, we've got these 3 personalities within us, and they're always clashing with each other. And if we sort of default to the technician aspect, which means we love the the bits and the pieces and the mechanics of putting together a record and how to work the DAW and the plugins and trying to solve the equation of mixing or mastering or even composition and arranging a song. It's these other skills of management on the one hand and of the entrepreneur on the other. The entrepreneur for me is a skill set that I get kind of lost in dreamy land. Like I'm dreaming about, I got so many ideas. No, wouldn't this be cool? Wouldn't that be cool? Wouldn't this be cool? And sometimes it's hard to, put that into action. And then with the management side, that of course is just simply interacting with other people. What's one of the biggest thing that ever breaks up all the bands in the world is lack of management skills, people skills from members of the band working together long term.
Yeah, well, and in the studio, that producer, the guys, they pay the big bucks. The producers are the ones that know how to get along with people and how to capture that magic moment. And the technician is only obsessed with. I'm trying to think of like what's a nerdy thing to get obsessed with in the studio about like
that little red light at the top of your level meter.
Yeah, that's a great one. Yeah, or I feel like your high E string is 0.1 cents flat. Let's do that take again. Even though it was magic and everyone started crying, it wasn't good enough. Like we need to get it perfect. And I think that is the age we live in because, hard drives are almost free compared to what they cost 15 years ago. So what I always see in the studio and what I always saw as a producer is the first take was magic, but from a technical standpoint, it was terrible. Lots of mistakes. The second take was a little less magic, but a little more perfect. And then the third take was perfect, but no magic at all. And that sort of balance between no one wants to listen to perfect music.
Yeah.
No one cares that you spent 10,000 hours editing your drums if there's not a magic like grab you by the seat of the pants, make you want to cry when you listen to the song. And I mean, you listen to the great recordings throughout history, they're dirty and imperfect. And,
but the emotion and the reason to listen is all there. Yeah. You're going to make me cry. I'm thinking about all those 10,000 hours that I put into editing. We were talking about Pro Tools free. And then I think shortly after that was Pro Tools 4 and 5. This was way back. And we didn't even have things like Beat Detective. That didn't exist yet.
Yeah.
And so what we used to do was record the drums and go in by hand and chop every single note of the drums and then move them to the grid and then re-crossfade each one. And it would just take, a full day just to go through the drums and do that. Maybe even longer because you'd crossfade and you come back tomorrow and need to fix more stuff.
Oh, yeah.
It was just over the top, and sure enough, I was deep in the technician weeds at that time. And there were all sorts of management issues that we were missing and entrepreneurial issues where we were not aware that the song wasn't really good enough, or we were, maybe the song was good enough, but we weren't aware that the deal with the record label was completely floundering. And, we were headed for finishing our masterpiece only to get dropped by the label just before it got released, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. There's at least 3 things that you're going to have to balance well. And if you don't, you will never make anything great.
All right. So, Chris, I want to dig into mixing and mastering, but one of the things that, again, I explained is pretty remarkable about you is that you've really figured out a wonderful way to balance it all. So that, as you described, you do have as much work coming in the door as you want for your business and for your mastering studio. You're able to live a lifestyle the way you want it. And I think that, we're talking to rock stars who are listening to this all over the world, and people aren't necessarily in New York, LA, or Nashville. They might be in some other small town somewhere, and they really want to do this, they're passionate, but they're trying to figure out how can I connect to the world, and the internet is a great way to do that.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit more about some of the things that we need to understand to create our own version of something like you've done. Bring in and interact with clients through our website, through the internet, and get a balance between those elements, the entrepreneur, the technician, the manager? What advice do you have us to balancing that out and kind of beginning to formulate? Obviously, making a lot of mistakes along the way and being willing to fall is a good start.
Well, it's tough to make blanket statements, but I would say, at least for me, that the most important thing is a commitment to lifelong learning. That if you don't read books and you think you're going to build a successful business, you will be the exception, not the rule. I don't know anyone that owns a small business that they started themselves who isn't really well read. And not that I want to kind of separate myself from this. Let me talk to myself from a few years ago before I read. Back in the day, I didn't read at all. I would never read. And I sort of thought it was snooty, and it just reminded me of being in school, and was like, ugh, I hated reading.
Hey, you were too busy beat detectiving drums, right?
Yeah. And I hated when someone would tell me to read. So I associated reading with being told what to do. And right after I started, the mastering side of things, well, I'd been doing it for a while, but as soon as I launched the website, and traffic really began to pour in as I, started advertising. But back then I was doing a lot of ads on Google. So it was just, those text ads, which back then were a lot easier to compete on. They're very, very difficult to compete with now. I don't even think I do any of those anymore. But at one point I was so busy and was so inefficient that I was super unhealthy, the total technician all day long, every day. And, grumpy and just everything that when you think of a mastering engineer, and if you've ever met a mastering engineer, they're usually very grumpy.
No, but I meet a grumpy guy in the mirror every morning. So I know what you're talking about.
But yeah, so the big thing was I started reading books about running a small business and entrepreneurship and interpersonal skills. And it blew my mind when I started reading these books, because it was the sudden realization of there's good stuff that helps me in my life written in a book. That's crazy. Why didn't they assign this my freshman year of high school instead of Catcher in the Rye or, and so I started reading like crazy. I started reading a lot of biographies. I read Barry Gordy, who founded Motown, his biography. That blew my mind. And just kind of for me, it's always been the more I've read, the healthier I've gotten. And the healthier I've gotten, the better my business has been. And the more I've been able to focus on, what really matters. And, for me, my biggest thing is my family. I've got 3 little kids and an amazing, beautiful wife who's smoking hot. And for me, most audio engineers that I know, that's a really difficult thing to balance, family and audio.
Absolutely.
And so for me, I just wanted to know that I was going to do that well. And so that was always the driver of you need to read more books on how to run your business well, so it doesn't drive you insane and you end up losing your family someday. So for me, that was a big driver for me. I came from a broken family, and I don't want one. And so I totally forget your question. I'm on.
Oh, but I love what you're saying about this. I mean, me too. I came from a broken family that I didn't want to repeat myself. And I'm just trying to find balance where, I'm parenting now. I've got a daughter who's growing up, and I'm trying to do the studio thing, and it's all, trying to keep it all balanced. I think there are a lot of people listening who are going through some similarity where they want to do the music. They want to keep some balance in it. They want to know that a business in music doing recording, mixing, mastering exists, because you and I, we've seen a lot of this change over the decades that we've been doing it. Yeah. And it's the old models disappear and the new models always coming in. So it really is in a constant state of flux.
Well, and to my point, you have to be a lifelong learner, because anything that you do now isn't going to work in 5 years. So you have to be committed to that lifelong learning. If I'm going to be reading every book I can get my hands on and reading every blog post that, applies to what I'm trying to do, or you're going to get left behind. Some young kid who grew up with an iPad and who's been recording music. My son's 6. He's been making music in GarageBand since he was 3. He's going to crush me when he's 20 years old. And so I have to be constantly learning, or, we're out the door. And that is the state of the recording industry right now. The home studio, younger people have changed everything because they are willing to learn. They're willing to go on YouTube and to watch a mixing tutorial video and be awful at something until they're good at it.
Yeah.
And so I think,
they don't even care. I mean, I kind of remember that as a kid. You get excited about the things you want to get excited about. You just don't even care about the rest.
Yeah. So back to what I was saying about books. I think the big idea here is to separate out that you have 2 things that you do as a worker. When you're working in the studio, you're trying to make something. You have production and you have production capability. When I say production, I mean your ability to create something, whether that's engineering the best sounding drums anyone's ever heard, or whether that's mixing a record, or whether that's working with a vocalist to get their vocal take amazing, whatever that happens to be. Or if you're a guitar tech and you're setting up guitars or building guitars, you've got production, what you make, and production capability, how much you can make. You have to invest in production capability, and that inevitably is going to mean reading a lot of books.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah.
Well, so I was going to take it to the next question I like to ask, which is, tell us about a real aha moment for you, something where it kind of clicked. And it sounds like as you were discovered reading in these books, your eyes started to open about some possibilities. Did you have a real aha moment that, became a big step for you with your business?
Oh my gosh, thousands. For me, like the fascinating thing about being committed to lifelong learning and working on my production capability is that, I went to a 4-year university and, I got a normal suburban education, but I learned more every year than I did all 4 years combined, for the past 5 years at least. So there've been so many of those. And one of them, back to my kind of comment about audio engineers usually being jerks. I read a book last year called How to Win Friends and Influence People. Mm-hmm. And that book, I never wanted to read it because I was like, man, that sounds like a book that an asshole would read. Like, it just seems so manipulative. And I always put it off, and it had been recommended like so many times to me. So I finally picked it up and read it. And a big, aha moment that's impacted my marriage, my friendships, my kids, and my business is this idea in the book that it's better to be wrong and keep the relationship than to be right and lose the relationship. And I feel like the audio engineer personality loves to be right, loves to know, I told you it was the 610B preamp and not the 610A preamp on the Van Halen record from, whatever. Like, we love the trivia and we love to sort of strut around and show off our technical ability. And as a result, we're terrible producers and we don't make good art. We just make perfect art. And so that really blew my mind, this idea that I was always concerned about, like, I want to be amazing, which means I should be right all the time.
So was it wrong and keep the relationship?
Yeah, wrong and keep the relationship, then right and lose the relationship, even if it's just a piece of the relationship.
Yeah.
So for me, I'll never forget, like, a perfect example of just my ineptitude with interpersonal skills was when me and my wife were dating. I brought her in the studio, and she's this incredible singer. She's the best I've ever met, which is great because I didn't know it when we started dating. It was this kind of unbelievable extra bonus. And I took her in the studio and we were recording, and she gets done with her first take, and I hadn't set the expectations of what recording looks like at all. She got done, and I was, with her first take, and I, pushed the talk back button and said, "That was great. Let's do it again."
So that's great, but I think it was 0.1 cents flat or something.
Yeah, and she burst into tears, and it was like, "Wow, what the hell is going on?" Like, this is, and it was, oh, well, you didn't have any interpersonal skill. Every great record, with only a couple exceptions, was the result of somebody who had the interpersonal skills to make everyone feel comfortable so that they could make magic in a room together. And boy, I sure didn't have that when I started out as a young man.
Yes. When I had Warren Heward on the show, he was talking about his mentor, Jack Douglas, and about how he had that same skill to it was an interpersonal skill where every person who's in the band, there's nobody that doesn't feel included and doesn't feel like they're an important member of the creative process in the studio. And I think that's a great takeaway, you know?
Yeah.
Sometimes I've got that skill, and there's been plenty of times where I have not had that skill.
It depends on the amount of coffee that you've had.
Yeah, good point. And sleep and what time of day it is.
Yeah.
Well, so, you know, I like hearing about the way that you're incorporating the always present learning, you're reading, you're finding a balance. Tell us a little bit about what does a daily schedule look like for you, or what are some typical schedules for you in how you maintain a balance of all these things and still get in the learning?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, I try to set time each week to work on my business rather than for it. And again, back to that E-Myth Revisited book. That was a huge realization for me in that book when he talked about you have to say, on this day at this time, I'm not going to work for the business. I'm not going to work on production. I'm not going to make something or do what it is that I'm hired to do. I'm going to work on being able to do that more. I'm going to work on marketing, or I'm going to work on a better system. Your podcast was such a great example of systems. I got that email from you with the questionnaire before, I came on, and it was just like, wow, he thought of everything. This is going to make everything go so smoothly. And that was clearly like you spent time to work, instead of recording a podcast, you spent time working on making podcasts go better.
Right.
And not having to be like, oh crap, you forgot to turn off your monitor speakers while you're recording into a microphone. So now there's this echo. So anyways, yeah,
well, and that's like, the technician part of me is the one that wants to tweak the sound of the vocal levels and edit the music in between on the podcast and, get lost in a Pro Tools session. And I guess the entrepreneurial or the management side of me wants to sit down and make sure that the invitation emails are, have all the information you need, which, by the way, I'm glad that you felt like I had thought of everything and not thought of way too much, because sometimes I look at that stuff.
Oh, it's perfect.
And it seems like it can be overwhelming. And that, not that we have to go off in the weeds, but that is something that I've discovered that's a mistake that we all have to go through when we're trying to do the management preparation side. So let's say you're doing a session or you're having an event at your studio, and you're trying to think of stuff that you want to tell people about beforehand. I think inevitably the first thing you do is you way over communicate, and there's like way too much information, and people can't even read the email that you send. And then you start thinning it out until you finally have just a few bullet points that you think people really need to know about, and get to. And, that would apply to a tracking session even. It's like, you set up way too many microphones until one day you realize that you really just need these ones. And if we need extras, we'll go get them. We don't need to set up everything that's in the entire studio for this one overdub.
Yeah. Well, and case in point, this is a little bit roundabout, but the technician in the studio is going to set up too many mics, and then they're going to do a take, and the technician's going to say, give me just a minute. I need to edit that. And then the band sits there while you edit, and they hear the soloed vocal being played back 100 times, 50 times. And then, okay, guys, let's take that again from the top. Like, magic's gone, dude.
Yeah.
It ain't coming back. Like, definitely not. But yeah, so as far as schedule goes for me, I find it's all about bookending my day. That when I wake up in the morning, I have time with my family. We eat breakfast together. We have an AeroPress coffee maker that is one of the lights of my life, and we make unbelievable coffee. Hang out as a family, and then I head down. We have our studios in the basement, and I head into the studio and I start working. And I try to take a lot of breaks. I have a sort of a timer that goes off every 2 hours or so. And once that timer goes off, I try to, walk out of the studio, get my blood flowing a little bit, make sure I'm hydrated, make sure I look out the window enough. And because our studio is a box, I seal myself in here, and it's, acoustically dead and all artificial light and everything. So
it's acoustically dead, but you don't want to be.
Yeah, exactly. So for me, like, the schedule changes from day to day, but I'll usually schedule a specific day. Depending on where I'm at in the business, it might be Wednesday afternoon. might be, I'm not going to book any projects for Wednesday afternoon. I'm going to book an EP in the morning, and then I'm going to keep myself free in the afternoon, and then I'm going to work on the business and make sure, hey, what are questions that I get all the time from people on a project? You know what? Let's add that to the upload form, or let's let's save that as an email that I can send to people when they have that question. And for me, I really, like, it was creepy at the beginning of the podcast. You hit the nail on the head when you were describing what you thought I was trying to do with my business, about trying to provide. What was the phrase you used? Over deliver. Over deliver. That, to me, I think is the secret. I think that's what I'm always trying to do. I understand that the secret to a successful business is over promise or under promise, over deliver. And the place we start is over promise, under deliver. Yeah. And for me, having time set aside to make sure that I am making things go smoothly for people, that it's not this like surprise after surprise after surprise, so that people's expectations are set. And it's not this experience that I had with my wife of, that was great, let's take it one more time. Yeah. I don't want people to be surprised. So yeah, like having a schedule that mostly focuses on me being mentally healthy is really the number one thing for me. Because if I'm mentally healthy, I'll do great work. If I'm not, my work suffers. Yeah. Well, I appreciate you talking about getting up and walking around. I'm actually standing right now. I like to do standing interviews. Oh, cool. Because I feel awesome. Like it helps with the energy. But, getting up out of the chair, I personally think it's a shame that we have to sit while we work most of the time. I agree. At least a singer gets to stand up and sing if they want to. Yeah. And a guitar player or whatever. But, it's the nature of our job that we're usually sitting to try and be positioned in front of a pair of speakers. We're looking at a screen. We're sitting with our elbows close to our body and our hands going out at a 90, and we're just moving our wrists around a little bit. And what a drag, that's sort of what we've got to work with. So as a result, I think we have to overcompensate to just keep our physical body and our brain awake and doing great work all day by getting up out of our chair every once in a while and just moving around the room. Absolutely. So every day when I wake up, I have a priority list, and it's sort of an ongoing to-do list. And it's always in order. I always prioritize it. And the first three things on the list are: 1, get healthy; 2, prioritize; and then 3, do the number one thing. So my technician personality doesn't care how important something is. It only cares that I'll feel better about myself after I do it. And so from a management standpoint, managing myself, if I get healthy, I'm in a spot to look at a list of things that I need to finish today, or that I need to finish for the next month, and to put them in the right order and say, this is the number one thing that you need to do today. You need to deliver the masters for this guy. And then you need to work on, what's a good example here? You need to put a new piece of gear in the studio. A new converter in the AeroPress coffee maker. Exactly. Yeah. So that I think is the big thing. I feel like we who enjoy recording, that tends to make us unhealthy. Well, that's sort of it. I think just that a lack of mental health and a love of recording, those tend to be. Yeah, they're our competing things, because it's my. Like, I'm addicted to the computer. I mean, in a good way. Yeah. In creating and music, and I love learning how to work with the internet. Making this podcast for me, building an email list, having a website, all these things. They're a lot of fun to figure out. They're just as much fun for me to figure out as plugins were, or recording gear, or how to manage a patch bay was. And so they're compelling. They pull me in. I want to go back to my computer. I want to do this stuff, but at the same time, the older I get too, my eyesight isn't what it used to be, and I need a little bit more moving around to stay in the same healthy place. Same physical shape, and it's like that. They're competing things, so it's something that I'm constantly dealing with. But I do think there's a lot of value in getting a standing desk if you can, just standing up, working those ways.
But I wanted to, you made some light bulbs go off when you were talking about the over-delivering thing. And I thought I would just comment on this, that over-delivering always feels best and seems to work best, I think, when you have that opportunity, like you described, working on your business, like you're preparing for that. You're doing that ahead of time.
Yes. Oh,
versus,
you have to.
Versus those times which we start out with and find ourselves in a lot, which is in the moment. It's like, oh, can you just work an extra hour? You know, so many times we're likely to do that because we love what we do and we love our art. But it occurs to me that over-delivering when it's in the moment and you're giving a little more than you got, that wears you down, and over-delivering ahead of time and just, having the foresight to do it is more empowering.
Well, and I think that over-delivering concept is something that we as audio people struggle with. I think most people, they want to know, well, how much am I worth? What am I worth in the studio? How much am I worth as a mix engineer or mastering engineer or session guitarist? And the answer to what you're worth is what the most money that one person would pay you for. So if somebody would pay me $1 million to master their record, that means I'm worth $1 million, but I'm only going to get one customer ever if I do that. So you have to over deliver so that you're charging less than what you're worth, so that you have enough customers coming in the door to be consistent every month. Because what's going to get you as a small business owner is that month where you didn't make anything. And oops, the second month, the month after that, the same thing happened. And now you're in debt and broke and screwed. So I think that over deliver thing, like you have to figure out not what you're worth, which is what the technician wants, but how many projects could you book without breaking your back to make a business out of it. That's the entrepreneur that comes in and says, yeah, boy, if we did something special, like, hey, when you record with us, we have my brother's a massage therapist whose office is next door to my studio. We're going to include a massage in the recording session before you sing or before you do your take. And oh my gosh, we're getting the best music ever because everyone's so healthy and so feels so good. So, something like that, like people will only hire you if you're over delivering in a unique way. Yeah,
that's cool. I like that kind of smart approach to combining different things. This again is an aside, but my brother has a music studio in Brooklyn, New York, and they run a music band camp in the summers. And he noticed that right next to them was a climbing gym. And so they had the idea one day to combine band camp for kids with the climbing gym. And so now they have this thing called I guess it's just
tell me it's Rock Climbers. Please tell me
something. It's like Rock Climbers, but their motto is scale some rocks, rock some scales,
Dude, that's awesome.
Which is really cool, but it's just it's that thinking outside the box just enough that people, when they see that idea, they're like, oh, no brainer, let's definitely do that.
Oh man, where was that program when I was a kid? I would have lost my mind for that.
So Rockstars, there's a way to encourage you, if you have anything that's, maybe it's local, maybe it's something that you didn't think of that's kind of obvious, but it's right near you. There might be a way to cleverly over-deliver in the way that Chris is describing. Maybe it's maybe you've got the local coffee shop there and you can throw in a cup of coffee or something like that when people come by.
Let me speak to that. So for me, when our business really started to blow up, it was when I started including a free mixing consultation with every mastering project. So I would say, hey, if you book a project with me, I'll talk with you about your mix before I touch it, and I'll give you some ideas on how you can improve your mix. And that was huge. Like our business really took off because it was unique. And like the only reason I think a business will ever be successful is if you offer something unique. If you're offering the same thing that the next guy's offering, why would they hire you instead of the next guy? So that's huge, I think, as you're thinking about how do I take being like my love of making music or playing music or recording music and make that into a business. You can't make a solid living as a vanilla cover band unless you have something that makes you guys unique.
Yes, like you're all naked.
Yeah.
All right. So Chris, let me ask you this. Again, you've done some really smart things with building your business. And one of them, which I think is probably super scary for most everybody, is that forward-facing public aspect of it. It's making yourself accessible. It's advertising. And so I thought I would ask you to share with us some things that people might need to know about. What are some of the biggest first mistakes people might expect to run into if they say, okay, I'll do it. I'll do some ads, for my studio, for my mastering, for my mixing operation. What advice do you have for people about how to understand? Maybe just give us a basic understanding of what it means to advertise, bring in people, and then over deliver to them.
Well, I think you first have to start with, you have to offer something unique. You have to figure out, where does my passion intersect with what people are looking to do, and where does that intersect with what makes money? So you can imagine like a Venn diagram. There's 3 circles. There's what you love, there's what people want, and there's what actually is financially viable. And where those 3 intersect in the middle, I'm stealing this right out of a book by what was the guy's name? I can't remember. Somebody out there knows. Somebody's saying it right now. But Good to Great. I think it was Good to Great. Jim Collins. I'm stealing out of a Jim Collins book.
Okay, cool.
But this idea, you have to have that first. It doesn't matter how good your advertising is if your offering isn't compelling. And for me, I started out, and we still do, our bread and butter is, hey, we'll do a free mixing consultation if you hire us. But before you hire us, we'll do a free mastering sample. And the free mastering sample was what brought people in. And, it's me giving away my time. It's very time consuming, but a huge percentage of people that get a free mastering sample from me hire me again and again and again and again for the rest of their life. And that's the goal, really. So you have to have a worm on the hook. Mm-hmm. You have to have something that is going to make people want to nibble. And then once you have that, then you can start thinking about advertising in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously it's preferable to have some sort of free system where you're, making great content and then advertising something as, along with the content, whether that's video or blogs or whatever. But I tend to do a lot of paid advertising. That's sort of how I've grown my business. And paid advertising is terrifying. This idea that like, I'm going to make an ad and I'm going to pay Google or Facebook or Twitter or Bing or whoever it is to show this to people, and then hope that they click on it, and then hope that they hire me someday. Mm-hmm. And the only way to start doing that is to start very, very small. So my kind of nugget of truth is, do not go out and from scratch start spending buckets of money on this. Start small and make a commitment to a small budget per day, whether that's $5 a day or $10 a day, and come up with a time frame. I'm going to run this for a week, or I'm going to run this for a month or whatever. And you have to do that and experiment and see, is this resonating with people? Mm-hmm. Am I giving people something they want? And you have to provide value. I really I don't believe in this myth that businesses take from people, that like, I don't want to go far down the hole here, but this idea that, it's a business, it's an ad, they're trying to swindle me.
Right.
You can't build a business on swindling people in 2016.
No.
Maybe in 1916 you could, but in 2016, if you swindle people, everybody will know. So you have to over deliver. You have to find something that brings them in. And you bring them in with these paid ads to then hook them up and make them fist pump and say, oh my gosh, that was awesome. I'm going to write a 5-star review. And, for us, like, we've got well over 100 5-star reviews on Google. Only a small percentage of people actually even write reviews for us. But the big thing for me was starting, all right, I'm going to spend X dollars per day on advertising, and I started on Google AdWords, but for some people, Facebook, depending on what you're selling, might work better, or whatever. So, but it's something you have to commit to an experiment.
I want to point out something. So to understand one of the challenges with this, you have to understand the scope and scale of what it means to try and reach out, and make a cold call on the internet like that to do advertising. So if we were to think about this locally, we would go, okay, I'm going to go out and meet bands and musicians in local clubs. So I'll go to this club and I can only see so many people around me. And then I might go meet some of them. And I can kind of tell if they look like they might be a musician or they just played a show on stage. And, you're hyper targeting when you do that. And you don't even realize that you really are, other than, you didn't go to the library to go find musicians. You went to a club with a show. But on the internet, you have to make sure as best you can that you're trying to, if you're going to do a paid advertisement or even a free content. So Rockstars, when we're talking about the free content, it's this podcast, for example, it's a free resource. And because we have an audience and I'm speaking to you directly, I have the opportunity to, tell you about something that might be really cool going on that, if I'm going to do an event, for example, to invite you to it. So that's like a communication. If you're going to do a YouTube channel and you're going to create helpful videos that explain how to do stuff, you want to do it in such a way that ideally the people that are watching the videos are interested in what you're helping them with, and that the thing that you want to help them with that they might have an opportunity to pay you for, that's an extension of the same thing. So I'm being long-winded about this, Chris, but I'm trying to explain that concept that you have to really carefully think through the process of who you're communicating to, because otherwise you're just putting something out there and going, well, I made a website. I hope somebody in the world sees it,
Well, yeah. And that's the big thing. Like that's the thing that people believe. I'll build a website. I'll start a Facebook group. I'll make a Facebook page. That doesn't work at all. So you have to create value and give it away, throw it out there in the world so that people will accept it, and that builds trust. And I think, here's a great example of let's say you're in a rock band and you are playing in a new town and you want to get people to show up, but no one knows who you are. So a good example of a way that you could experiment with this paid marketing thing is you go on Facebook and you say, hey, our band sounds kind of like, I don't know, Lij, what's a good band that you
the Foo Fighters.
We sound like the Foo Fighters. So I'm going to go on Facebook, and we are playing in, let's see here.
Columbus,
Ohio. So I'm going to go on Facebook, and I am going to tell Facebook that I want to advertise only in Columbus and only to people who like the band Foo Fighters. And my ad is going to be a video of our band playing, and on the very beginning of the video, there's going to be text, and it's going to say, like the Foo Fighters, you'll love our band. Click to hear us. And
nice.
And Facebook will show that ad to only people in Columbus and only people who have hit the like button for Foo Fighters. And when they see that video in their feed, if they hit the click it, it will start making sound and they can listen. And then you at some point in the video say, hey, we're playing at Scully's on December 29th at 9 p.m. You should come out. Covers $5. That is a great example of how you can spend a very small amount of money on Facebook ads that's crazy targeted. Mm-hmm. If someone likes Foo Fighters and you're saying, hey, our band is kind of like Foo Fighters. If you like Foo Fighters, you like us. I'd click that.
That's super cool, man. And then Rockstars, just to understand it, I mean, you really need to get that right. And one of the reasons why you don't want to spend a bunch of money at first is because Facebook, for example, would gladly let you spend $500 on Facebook ads. And if you had it dialed in wrong at the beginning, it would reach lots of people, but they might not be the people who exactly what you needed to reach. So that's why you want to do targeting. A little bit first. Now, let's talk about one other detail. I know we're getting ninja, and this isn't exactly a business podcast, but there is something called conversion statistics. And with the internet, what that is saying, all right, so when people go to this particular advertisement, this Facebook ad, for example, and they click through and they come to a web page that is telling them more about the show, I'm going to put in a little code, a snippet of code in that web page that measures that person just came from Facebook to come to the web page. And so you kind of close this digital internet loop, which allows Facebook to tell you, yes, you spent so much money on these ads. People click through to find out more about what it was that you were doing. And we were able to measure how many people did it. And then Facebook or Google or whatever platform you're using on the internet can tell you what the cost was for each person that clicked through and checked it out. And you can get even deeper with it because you can measure how many tickets you sold for a show, for example.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
and that's
it's
really
cool
what
stuff.
It's super cool stuff. It's a fun game to play. I love it. And that idea of, I'm going to commit to $5 a day to advertise in Columbus, Ohio for my band who's playing later this month at, the XYZ club. I'm going to advertise that, hey, we sound like such and such band. Click the thing to hear us. And then from there, you want to figure out how many of those people that clicked it did an action. And that action, you could say either they liked the band page or they your band's page, or they it forwarded them to an event on Facebook and they clicked going. There's all sorts of actions that you can say, my goal is to get them to like our band page, or my goal is to get them to say they're going to this event, or my goal is to send them to Ticketmaster and to get them to buy this ticket. And that would be a little more complicated, but then you can quantify how much you're spending for each action. So you can say,
right,
wow, we spent $5 a day and we got 76 likes per day based on that ad. So whatever 76 divided by 5 is, we were paying, I'm embarrassing myself here. Was that 15?
Less than 20.
Yeah. You're spending, not a whole lot of money per like. And then you can decide whether that's worth it or not. Or if it's something where you're selling a CD or an album, a vinyl album, or it's giving away my age. No one sells CDs anymore. Or you're selling a ticket online, then you can figure out, hey, we spent $5 a day and we sold 2 tickets every day based on that ad. So for every $5 we spent on this ad, we made 10, which means we made $5 out of thin air. That's freaking cool.
Yeah. Well, so Rockstars, at the risk of you thinking that we're talking about bands touring and you're like, but wait a minute, this is a recording studio show. It's all interrelated, of course, but I'll just spin it back. So in Chris's example, Chris, you offering to do a mastering sample for people, that's something that would be called a loss leader in business, right?
Yes,
so that's the idea that says, I'm going to take a loss on certain things as the leading move for how I over-deliver to a customer so that when it brings in customers, that generates some income. And then what you do is you sort of weigh that loss leader against the value of the customers that you bring in, and it becomes just an expense, like advertising is an expense, like buying plugins is an expense. You know what I mean? So these are ways that you can get really clever with your business. I guess, if you're not doing mastering, Rockstars, if you're doing mixing, for example, or even just recording, you can look at, and you should look at, the opportunity to communicate with people. So let's say you bring in customers and you say, I'll do a consultation with you over Skype or over the phone, and we'll talk about your record. You might talk to somebody for half an hour. You might even meet them for coffee for an hour. Well, that's valuable time for you. So you should consider that as a form of loss leader for you in your business that you're creating, and try and, keep track of, well, how many coffee hours do I put in? How much does that really cost me in my time? And you sort of weigh that into the calculations of what the results are as far as bringing in new customers, doing records with them, and how that all balances out.
Well, and I think a great idea, one of my good friends owns the finest studio here in Columbus. One of the things he does is he throws listening parties at his studio.
Yeah. Nice.
And that's a loss leader. So he buys some beers and some pizzas, and he invites a select group of people over to the studio, and every person brings a song. Well, the theme, I was at the party last night. The theme was Queens. So people brought in, like an Aretha Franklin song, and then somebody else brought in an Adele song, and then somebody else brought in a Pat Benatar song or whatever. And then you get up and present, and you play it on the big, nice studio speakers, and everyone listens and says, ooh, ah. And then you take turns, and it's a great excuse to show off the studio. So for the price of a couple pizzas and inviting some people to your studio, now people are thinking and talking, and better than that, talking on social media. Wow, the listening party at XYZ Studio last night was awesome. Their speakers sound amazing. Oh, XYZ Studio. I was thinking about booking some studio time. Maybe I'll look into them. Boom.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, and that's one of those things where you have to set time apart, I think, at least weekly, to work on your business, to scheme for your entrepreneurial personality, to scheme an idea like that of, I'm going to invite these 25 people out to the studio and we're going to have a listening party, or we're going to make a song with members of 5 different bands. And it's going to be a free recording session I'm going to get all the musicians coming in. They're going to collaborate and write a song on the spot, just as an excuse to get people in your space.
I think it's smart. The one that we were doing here for a while was called Stereo Sessions, and Rockstars, if you're curious to check it out, it's actually just stereosessions.com. So you can go check it out. But we were inviting bands in, and we'd have maybe 6 bands in an evening and set them up, and each band would get up and perform live. I'd do a live 2-track mix, and then we'd shoot videos of it on iPhones and other iOS devices, and then edit these videos and put them out. We did it for a year. We were putting out 2 videos a week, in fact.
That's genius, Lij. That's an amazing idea.
It was a lot of fun, It was a lot of work, too, and I learned a ton about what did we say? Management and entrepreneurial aspects. But it was a lot of fun to do, and everybody really enjoyed it. And it did, for sure, bring in records. So that's a great way to do it. I encourage anybody with a studio anywhere to try and do that, to bring in local community. And just what you're doing is again, the over-delivering idea is saying, I'm going to try and help the local community create really useful content for themselves. We already know that bands need video content of them performing on YouTube, especially to get shows. Shows want to see, well, what do these guys look like and sound like when they're actually performing live? And it was just a fun way to help promote bands.
That's so cool.
Well, so Rockstars, we're going to take a break here, and then we'll come back in for the jam session. Before we do, though, I want to remind you that you can find show notes to what we're talking about here with Chris Graham. You'll find that at recordingstudiorockstars.com. Just use the magnifying glass, and you can search for Chris Graham, and it'll take you right to the blog post. And if you enjoyed the music on the show at the intro, you can go give that a listen at skadooshmusic.com, SKADOOSH. Skadoosh. Yeah, it's my music, my original music.
That's awesome.
So I'm pitching it. And yeah, and if you want to get yourself a cool looking t-shirt, just go to rsrockstars.com/t-shirt. But we'll see you guys in a minute, and we'll be back for the jam session.
Awesome.
Yoga stretch, dude. Hey everybody, it's Lij Shaw, and I want to thank you so much for listening to this episode of Recording Studio Rockstars. I really appreciate you, and I really appreciate your time. And as a way of saying thank you, I've created a special mix tutorial just for you, Rockstars, totally free, called the Mix Master Bundle. With it, you get over 2 hours of detailed videos watching over my shoulder as I mix a song in my studio. Plus, I give you the free ebook that explains how I recorded the tracks, and you get downloadable multi-tracks so that you can practice your mixes, including the Pro Tools session file, using nothing but stock plugins in Pro Tools, all of which you would find in any other DAW, whether you're on Logic or Studio One or Reaper. Maybe you're struggling with trying to improve your mix technique, or maybe you just simply don't have access to multi-track files or can't record a full drum set in your studio. I wanted to give you a chance to create your own mixes from full drum kit, bass, and guitars recorded in my studio. The song is called American Winter, and it's off my instrumental record Skadoosh, and it's all available for you totally free right now. All you need to do to get it is text Mix Master Bundle to 33444, and I'll send it directly to your email. Again, that's Mix Master Bundle with no space to 33444, or you can go directly to mixmasterbundle.com, enter your email, and I'll send all the files directly to you. Thanks so much, Rockstars. We'll see you guys in the jam session. Cheers. Rockstars, we're back now for the jam session. My guest today is Chris Graham with Chris Graham Mastering in Columbus, Ohio. And really excited to have you here. Chris, are you ready to jam?
I am ready to jam.
All right, dude. So tell us, when you were starting out in recording, what was the big obstacle that was holding you back?
The fact that the only thing you could buy that was affordable was cassette tape based back in the day. And it was awful. So yeah, that was difficult. And this was before like YouTube and really the internet. So there was no information. Everything was experimentation based. And this is the worst part. The first studio I worked in, you'd record at 48K on ADAT, and then you would bounce down from the ADAT to a computer, and then you would wait 40 minutes for the computer to convert the 48K to 44.1K so that you could burn it to a CD. It was awful.
Oh, man. And, you talk about the only place to get your information. As I recall, the only place to get your information was from the sales guy at the music store, and that was really not a whole lot of fun.
No, it was not. Yeah,
they may have been biased.
Center. Yeah.
All right. Well, so now how about some of the best advice you received when you were, or anywhere along the way there?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. You could do this for a living. That was probably the best advice I ever got when I was mastering records for other producers, and my mentor said, you could do this for a living. That changed my life 100%.
But you missed it because the phone cut off. He was talking to you on the phone, and just after it accidentally hung up, he finished his sentence, which was, but you probably shouldn't.
Absolutely.
No, I'm just teasing.
Well, those are wise words. Probably shouldn't. Like, you have to know what you're signing up for when you're doing audio for a living. It's
Do you think the odds are stacked against us in this creative pursuit of making records and music and audio? I would say in the past they probably were, because there's probably very limited opportunities. But I don't know, man, because I think it's a fair question. I think there's an assumption that, only the really dedicated will persevere in this. But at the same time, you've seen the power of being smart and having your eyes open and tapping into the internet and sort of working hard to build something. Maybe the opportunity is massive for people right now.
Well, and that's a great question. And I think the scary thing about the recording industry is one question: what's it look like in 5 years?
It's always the same answer. It looks different than it does now.
A lot different. Yeah. So back to my, kind of initial point that I'm sure some of, the listeners were pushing back in their hearts, the commitment to lifelong learning and reading a lot. Like, you can't possibly hope to be competitive in an industry that is changing as fast as ours unless you are always learning. Mm-hmm. You're not going to get a union job at a recording studio and be able to do the same thing every day for the next 30 years. That ain't happening. There might be like 2 guys in America that are doing that.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that you answered the question about your schedule, where you said, on certain parts of certain days, you would block out time for things like working on your business, for example. Because when you talk about always learning, Rockstars, I want to remind you, this doesn't mean that we need to be doing a little bit of every single thing we ever wanted to do every single day, because then you kind of never really get deep enough into anything. It's like, oh, that's 10 minutes of that thing. We better switch gears again. You might need to allow ourselves, or we might need to, Lij, you might really need to allow yourself, a good 2 hours of time to do one thing once or twice a week. And maybe that's what I get for each different category of what I want to be doing to improve my work and my creativity and my business.
Yeah, 100%.
All right, cool. So now how about sharing with us, Chris, a recording tip, hack, or secret sauce, something that our rock stars could use today in the studio?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, probably the most whenever anyone books a project with me, and I'm sorry for the pitch here, whenever anyone books a project with me for mastering, I always include a mixing consultation where I'm giving them tips on how to improve their recording. And the most common one that I end up giving to people, especially if it's people that are sort of just starting out in recording, is, are you using parallel compression on your vocals? Mm-hmm. And the answer is almost always no, unless these are really seasoned engineers that have, mixed a couple dozen records or something like that. And it's always fun with people like that, though, my vocals just don't sound as big and as thick and as warm as, the songs I like to listen to. Like, well, experiment with some parallel compression on that vocal, because when you're thinking about radio vocals, when you're thinking about that top 40 sound, a huge piece of that is parallel compression, and it has been since the 60s. And that's sort of that idea of, I'm going to have my normal vocal channel, and then I'm going to use an aux, and I'm going to send some of that signal off of that vocal channel to a new channel. I'm going to bus something to an aux, and then I'm going to compress it a lot, and then I'm going to mix that in underneath the vocal, the super compressed signal, just a little bit. And you have to be really careful here, because if there's latency issues in your DAW that haven't been compensated for, and one of them is farther back in time than the other, obviously you're going to get some weird phasing. But if everything, from a phase standpoint, from a latency standpoint is taken care of, that adds this huge, thick girth to vocals that it's really, frankly, difficult to get in any other way. So, yeah, it's always a blast when I'm giving people advice during the mix consultation, and I say, have you tried parallel compression in your vocals? And usually I'll leave it at that. I won't explain anything. Just let them experiment, because it's going to be different for every vocal. Yeah. And then they come back and are like, oh, my gosh, that sounds so much better. Thank you.
That's pretty cool, man. Well, we did a mix clinic here recently, and I showed some parallel compression techniques to the class here, and got feedback right after that. People saying, at least a couple of rock stars who wrote in saying like, oh my God, this was a game changer. It was so awesome mixing my, finishing my EP or my record just now using that trick. So I agree. It's a very cool thing. I feel like I'm still learning it too. It's like you said, we're always learning, and there's always a new level of trying this out. And there's so many ways to do it too, that you're like, oh, I'll try it this way this time.
Yeah. I mean, even if you're using just Logic to mix with, Logic Pro X, or, Pro Tools, if you have a vocal and you're thinking about putting parallel compression on it, just with stock plugins, you have well over 1,000 different options on how you could do that parallel compression. And some are going to sound better than others.
Yeah. And I mean, just pick one EQ, for example. There are infinite number of variables of how you could EQ that parallel compressed vocal, and blend it back in, and it'll highlight, or what's the opposite of highlighting? Unlight. It will unhighlight
mask
certain aspects of the vocal, so you can sort of bring forward. If you want it to be warmer, you could highlight warmer frequencies. So that's pretty cool. I like that a lot. I had some other thought about it, but I've already forgotten it, so I won't go there with it. Now, how about sharing a favorite hardware tool? And this doesn't necessarily mean something in the rack. It could just mean something unexpected that's physical that you've got on sessions, whether they're recording, mixing, or mastering, and you're just always glad you've got it.
Yeah. Well, let me talk about two pieces. So this is totally uninteresting if you know a lot about mastering, but the heart and soul of my studio is a Crane Song ABBA set, and that's my baby. It's the converter that I use for everything, and I'm not unique in that. Just about every respectable mastering engineer uses that piece. So that's one. And then another, when I was 14 years old, I was at my grandma's house, and my grandpa was very into audio as well. And I was down in his workshop messing around, and I found this old tube stereo, and I just love vacuum tubes. And my grandma said, oh, you can have that if you wanted. And it was a 1964-ish Fisher 400 receiver. So it's a radio, but it's also an amplifier. It's 30 watts per channel, push-pull. It's AB amp. And I still use it all the time to this day. And it does something to the stereo width when you're listening back to something that I've never heard on another amp before. It's, it brings you inside the recording, and you can hear the lips on the singer, and you can hear the tip of the drumstick on the ride cymbal in a way in space that it's just, I've never found on anything else. So I still use it all the time. I'm always working on it, cracking it open and swapping out capacitors and stuff like that.
That's cool. Yeah, I have a buddy who was always way into tubes, and he had a Scott tube receiver kit. And those were really cool. Like back in the day, you'd get a kit and you'd build the receiver yourself. And man, did that thing sound good.
Well, Scott is basically the brother of Fisher. They're very similar brands. So I'm sure, that thing sounded amazing.
So Rockstars, I definitely encourage you to go take the Wayback Time Machine and get into old component stereo stuff. It's a lot of fun to set up stereos and listen to music that way.
Well, and that's the thing is my amp had sat for years in my basement. And one day I was like, I'll get it out. We'll swap it in on the mastering rig and see what it sounds like on my Bowers and Wilkins speakers. And it was like, oh man, that's amazing. But I never thought to try it because it was so accessible to me. I've had it since I was 14. So if your grandparents have a real nice tube amp receiver, you might want to try that on your monitors.
That's cool.
It will do something different if it's in decent shape, but they can also kill you. So be careful with that.
All right, groovy. Well, so now, did you say there was a second one, or was it the two parts?
The two parts. So the Crane Song Avocet and the Fisher,
and the Fisher
400. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Lij, for paying attention so cutely. All right, so now how about a favorite software tool, or something that you've recently discovered that's really cool you want to let rock stars know about?
Yeah. So this is pretty mastering specific, but there is a company called Nugent that I am a huge fan of. Man, they are on their way as far as like they do stuff that I have not been able to find in other plugin manufacturers. And they just came out with a new plugin called Master Check that blew my mind. And basically it's two plugins. It's Nugent Send and Nugent Master Check. And you put Nugent Send first in your signal chain and Master Check last in your signal chain. And it allows you, there's like a buffer where it basically creates a connection between these two plugins. So you can listen to, whether you're using it for mixing or whether you're using it for mastering, you can use it to listen to the wet and dry version back and forth of your master or of your mix. And it offsets the volume of those two. So if you're using a ton of compression and your final wet signal is super loud, it will match your dry signals level to your wet signals level. So essentially you can turn all your effects on and off simultaneously without a volume adjustment to make sure that you're not just putting plugins on to make it louder and sound worse, as opposed to actually making it sound better.
That's very cool. That's a lot of fun. And that's a really handy tool because, it's so easy to disorient yourself when you're working on stuff and lose sight of whether or not you're actually making things better.
Yeah. Well, and that was one of the reasons I initially bought the Crane Song Avocet. It really specialized in that because you can get multiple digital streams out of one converter on this thing. Yeah. And but this Nugent Master Check is amazing just because of the offset feature. Where I can check an unmastered mix against my work and be like, yeah, I was on the right track. That sounds way better, and it's a whole lot louder. Okay, sweet.
Well, it's funny because it's one of those things, again, there are all these little details that get a little bit lost as we shift to making records in the box that we don't always see. It's kind of don't throw the baby out with the bathwater concept. And that's one of them, is that when you're mastering in the computer, you don't easily have that ability, unless you use a plugin like this, to check what it sounded like before to what it sounds like now that you're mastering it. But when I would go and master with an engineer, Hank Williams is somebody that I work with here in Nashville, and he would always have a button on the desk, and he just presses a button and shows you, here's what it sounds like before, here's what it sounds like after. And it's so it's such a great feeling as the producer or the artist to hear that. And you're like, oh man, that sounds so much better.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, and it's huge. And again, with the mental health, like a tool like that forces you to, what's the phrase?
Not fuck it up.
Yeah, that. But it forces you. There's a book called Integrity by Dr. Henry Cloud. And this book just rocked me. It made me a better man. And he talked about the ability to eat reality for breakfast without getting sick.
Wow.
And I was like, dude, oh man, I need that in my life. And I think the nature of, like that's the nature of being a human, is sometimes you don't want to embrace reality. And with a tool like this, it makes you say, well, have you improved anything? Or are you just totally full of crap?
So I'm going to say that back to you. The integrity is the ability to eat reality for breakfast without getting sick.
That's it.
That's such a great quote, man.
That book is so rad.
All right, tell us who the book is one more time.
Integrity by Dr. Henry Cloud.
Okay, great.
And again, with, back to this idea of like, hey, if you're the most technically like talented engineer in the world, hey, that's great. A mediocre producer is going to get paid more than you, and it's going to have a bigger impact on the world than you because of their interpersonal skills. And that was one of those books for me that just took my personal skills up a notch to just recognize, I don't have integrity sometimes because I want to pretend that reality is different than it is. I want to pretend that I'm a better engineer than I am, so I'll feel better about myself.
It's interesting because I would almost suggest, rock stars, that it's easier to work on your interpersonal skills anywhere on the globe than it might feel like at times to work on the finer points of the craft of mixing and mastering. Sometimes when you get really exacting with your engineering skills, you might feel like you need to be around other expert engineers. But if you want to work on your interpersonal skills, you just need to be around people.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that's amazing, man.
Well, so now how about a resource for the business side of doing this? What would you like to share for the rock stars that would help them out if they want to do this for a living?
Well, let me address that to two groups of people. People that already are doing it for a living, at least on some level. And then people who want to do it for a living. So for the people that are already sort of doing it, they have a studio space, they're making a little bit of money on the side doing this. I would say the book, The E-Myth Revisited, is an amazing resource. And it was one of the first books I ever read about how to run a small business. That book just rocked me. And it's not 100% awesome. There's some weird, I won't give anything away, but there's some strange parts of it, but the information is just so good. So the second thing I would say, I'm going to recommend two books for people that are starting out. The first book is called The Go-Giver. Yeah. And man, The Go-Giver, if you're thinking about starting a business, back to this idea of creating value and over-delivering, this idea that if you create good, that there's this sort of weird karma-esque thing that happens in business of if you try to get paid what you're worth, and it's super transactional, you're not going anywhere. But when you create a ton of value, Lij is a perfect example. If this podcast is, making a huge impact on people's lives, a ton of people are listening to it. He's creating value and he's not being directly compensated for that. That's a super, The Go-Giver that book would say, that's totally awesome. So that book is
nice,
incredible.
Man, thank you.
Yeah, that book is awesome. And the other book that probably less useful, but still really cool, is called The $100 Startup.
Oh yeah, it's another good one. Chris Guillebeau, right?
Yeah. I don't even know how to say his last name. I won't even try.
I just made that up.
I think you were right. But that book is great. Just this idea of hey, if you want to start a small business, here are some ideas to just get the ball rolling for $100 to start a small business. And I think most people, when they think about, I want to do this for a living, their idea is, well, I need to go to mom and dad and I need to get $150,000.
Right.
And I need to place this huge zero-sum bet where I either succeed and I'm a hero or I fail, and there's no gray in between there. And that is just old thinking. There's no such thing as that anymore. Everything now is about, small experiments.
Yeah.
And
was $100 Startup, the Lean Startup. That's another great book that talks about the experience of creating a business is called like the MVP, the minimum viable product.
Yeah. And if you're going to read that book, read a few other books first. That book is intense.
It is intense. It's cool. Cool stuff.
Yeah.
Well, and don't forget to read about audio.
Yeah.
While you're at it, Rockstars.
I would bet that most of your listeners are probably have put some pretty decent hours in experimenting, and they probably have some marketable skills. I think most people do.
Yeah.
If you're interested enough to be over an hour in on a podcast about studios, you're probably pretty good. Your interest has probably been enough to drive you to invest in a decent mic and to not use GarageBand anymore and to have bought Logic or Pro Tools or something like that. So I would say back to the center of this. I started reading books a couple years ago, and it changed my life. The business is so much better now than it was as a result of those books. And I'm so much better. I'm in such a healthier place. What I sort of, when me and my wife were dating, she broke up with me at one point. And I had this really toxic idea when after she broke up with me, I started asking her out again and again and again and again and again. And not in a stalker way, but in a, I want to get married, like I want to do this. And that's what we've done. We've got 3 kids. We're married. Our 10-year anniversary is tomorrow.
Congratulations.
Very exciting. Thank you very much. And I had this idea when I was pursuing her, trying to get her to go out with me again. And it was, what if I asked her out one more time? Or what if I didn't ask her out that one more time? And that one more time that I asked her out was it. And like 25 times into asking her out again in a not creepy way, she said yes again. And now we're married and we've got kids. And if I hadn't asked her out that one last time, who knows what my life would look like?
That's pretty intense, man. That is persistence. That's like clarity and dedication.
Well, and bringing this back to books, I think every human being is going to get to a spot in their life, if they're lucky, where they're going to look back, they're going to learn something and say, oh my gosh, why didn't I read this book when I was 20? Dang it. This book had what I was looking for. And a book like The E-Myth, or a book like
Go Giver,
dude. I mean, I would have traded. There's a couple books I'd trade a college education for. And I'm probably, that's probably a little bit of an exaggeration, but not really. This is not a whole lot of an exaggeration of like, my college education was nice, but boy, it was the books I read later when I was grinding, trying to make my business better, that really made all the difference in the world. I probably would still have my business if I didn't go to college.
Nice, man. Yeah, definitely for me too. Well, so now, all right, we're going to jump forward. How about sharing an organizational online resource or tool, something that would really help rock stars out with keeping all their stuff organized?
That is a great question.
Let's go to this. You're interacting with people on the internet. You are receiving audio. You're sending mixes back. I know from seeing your introduction emails and your what's the word I'm looking for? Your form that you sort of fill out as you're getting ready to work with you and your mastering company, that it's really well put together.
Thanks, man.
What would you say for rock stars about, here's some good tips. Here's some stuff that would really help you send music back and forth, keep it organized, not lose track of what's going on or where things are.
Yeah, well, I would say, let me kind of preface it with this. As a mastering house, I master about a record a day. So sometimes it's more, sometimes it's slightly less. But so for us, there's an enormous amount of data coming and going as I'm sending stuff in. So organization for me, it's without it, you cannot run a mastering studio that is in demand. I'm just not smart enough. Maybe there's people that are, but I'm sure not. So yeah, we do. it's more important for us than it would be for, say, a studio that, people are using 20 hours a week or something like that. And it's going to be one client for those 20 hours or something like that. So for us, we use Google Docs religiously within Google Drive, and we use Gravity forms on the website. So it lets us basically make forms that then we get an email with all the information. So I can ask all the right questions ahead of time instead of being in the middle of a mastering session and being like, oh yeah, I meant to ask you, are you going to be doing a vinyl release? No? Okay, cool. And then 10 minutes later, oh, by the way, do you need this in 24-bit or is 16-bit 44.1K okay? Okay, all right, let me go back. So that's what kills a mastering session is boy, when you said warm, did you mean like Nashville warm or like New York warm? Like, so like just having the right questions so that when I get to work on your record that I can just go, and then I know I can jump inside your head and get your first master back to you and not need any revisions. And that's the goal for any mastering engineer is to be a telepath, to read someone's mind and give them that master back. And someone says, oh my gosh, that's perfect. And that's it. That's what you're trying to do.
All right. Quick question for you, because you're again, light bulbs are popping as you say this stuff. That's super smart. And if I'm not mistaken, is Gravity Forms a WordPress plugin that you put onto your site?
Okay, it is. Our whole, I should have explained that. Our whole website's WordPress based.
Well, that's cool. We don't have to get too deep into that, but Rockstars, if your website is built on WordPress, then plugins, just like plugins for your DAW, are things that you can install that will add different functionality like that.
Yeah. And it's nice. You don't have to, our first website was 100% custom. Like everything about it was custom made, and it was so expensive and so slow to build it from scratch. And then eventually we made the jump to WordPress, and a lot of our functionality is plugin based. I
think it was probably like HTML, which I just coined a phrase in my head as I was thinking, was HTML stands for Hertz to make it live, right? So just be glad that we don't have to do that stuff anymore.
Yeah. Oh man, those were not, that was tough. That was a tough go at it.
Okay. So Chris, here's the question I wanted to ask you. I love your advice to create forms that ask the right kind of questions up front. And as you know, I've done some of that for this podcast, and I've done it elsewhere. And it's fun to do. It's hard to do. But the hardest part is this question. Now, when you're going to create a form, do you just sit down and stare at a blank piece of paper and start going, okay, what are all the questions I need to ask? Or have you found another way to make sure that you're building a list of important questions to add to your future form?
Yeah, well, for me, it really comes down to, and again, like I think I'm probably unique. If you're running a recording studio and you pump out a record a week, that's insane. But as a mastering studio, you just work with so many projects because they don't take that long. About a day for an album is a pretty normal turnaround time as far as the actual work that's put into it from the mastering engineer standpoint. Any mastering engineer that takes a week of working all day, 5 days a week, probably isn't going to give you a very good master. So as a result, there's a lot of data coming in and out. And as a result of that, there's a lot of questions that I get. A lot of people are asking questions. And there's also a lot of questions that I'm asking to my customers to make sure that I'm in their head, that I'm giving them, hopefully on the first revision or the first master, that I send them exactly what they were looking for. So a lot of that's just keeping track of what are the questions I have to ask and what are the questions that I frequently get asked. And I try to make sure to look at it in regards to, hey, I honestly get asked all the time, hey, we're going to need these masters in 24-bit too. Can you do that? Hey, wouldn't it be awesome if I just added that on my upload form and no one ever needed to ask me that question ever again? Just from now on, when I get their project email, that question has been answered and there's no like extra conversation that needs to happen. That allows me to move a little bit faster and to focus on creativity, to sit down and to focus on art and mastering and not have to worry about, let me look back 10 emails and see what he said about A, B, C, and D. And then I got to look back 15 emails to figure out what he said about X, Y, Z. It just having it in one place allows you to move quickly.
Okay, so here's a question. What about revision notes? Do you have a clever way of keeping revision notes from clients organized so that it's not just like you described, an email thread where you have to go digging for past emails?
Boy, we don't. I wish that we did. It's on my list of things to do to create like a better form for revisions. But frankly, it's not super high on my list because it's 95% of the time my first mastery gets approved.
Well, that's great.
Yeah, I think that's probably about exactly right. Occasionally we'll have like somebody will want to adjust their mix. They'll get an album back and they'll say, hey, we want to change a subtle thing on the mix of the 9th song and then have you remaster that. So that's a different thing. That's remastering. But as far as revisions go, it's usually very painless. Hey, these feel a little too compressed. If I get feedback, 5% of the time, it might be, we wanted it to sound a little more like the original mix. And then I pull my compression back a little bit, send it, and that gets approved almost 100% of the time. So,
quick question for you. I've had rock stars ask about other situations where it was clear to me that sometimes people have a fear that if they send something that is the finished version of something, that they're putting themselves at risk, like maybe they haven't been paid yet. Have you found that is an issue that needs to be addressed, or is that, again, something where people maybe are overthinking it and overly afraid of something that isn't really a problem?
Boy, I think that probably is context dependent. But for me, I have never sent a project. If I've ever sent a project before being paid, sent the final thing for it, I've 100% of the time either gotten screwed on getting paid really late or not getting paid at all. Wow. So I'm sure there are different parts of the world or different niches where that's not an issue. But for me, and because I'm in demand, I require all payments up front before I work. And that's the other thing too, is my turnaround's about a week, most of the time, most of the year. So for me, it's a week. It's not like if I'm going to hire someone to produce my record, I'm not going to pay them up front and then get the final product a year later. That's nuts. So for me, I require all my payment up front, and it just makes stuff simple. I want to master music for a living. I don't want to follow up with people and say, hey, where's that check you owe me?
Well, I'm glad I asked that question. That's a good one. I think people will really appreciate hearing that.
Yeah. Well, and that if someone was starting a studio and was looking for advice, that's advice I'd give them. I'd say never, ever, ever give somebody, a client, something that they could release before you've been paid in full.
Great. That's just great advice.
Even if it's your freaking brother or your mom, like I'm not being cold-hearted here. Well, it creates an awkward situation where this is funny. I'm actually doing a project for my brother, but I'm gonna give it to him before he pays me. So,
that's all right. But I'm actually doing mixes for my brother this week. He sent me 21 mixes to do.
Whoa, that's a lot.
And guess what? He did actually pay me up front. So thanks.
That's awesome.
Nate. Appreciate it. Well, so Chris,
it creates a lot of relationship problems if you have to deal with that later and be like.
Well, it's the beauty of the system that you set up where everything's sort of managed and taken care of on the way in. And that is a lesson that we learn repeatedly on the podcast from our guests, is that the more you can address things before they happen, the more likely they are to go right.
Amen to that.
So, Chris, I got a couple more questions and then we're all done. And again, Thank you for all your time. This one they're both hypothetical. And this one you've answered some of already, so you can kind of give us a condensed version if you want. But if you imagine you had to start all over again, or you were giving advice to somebody who was starting out at the beginning, and you needed a simple setup to record, you needed to find people to work with, and then you needed to make ends meet so that you could survive while you sort of built your career doing this, what advice would you have? Oh, man. Okay. So I'm going to give a fantasy answer. If I could redo it again, I would buy a vintage, what's it called? It's like a silver camper. An Airstream.
An Airstream.
You and Matthew McConaughey.
Yeah, I would buy, right, man, right.
Right.
So I would buy a miniature Airstream, strip it all out, and I would build a portable studio in that.
Cool.
And what would be cool about that is I think it's pretty easy to find live recording gigs. Everybody wants their band recorded well at a live show because it's easy for the band. They just play the show that they're going to play anyways, and they just need someone to record it and then mix it. So if I could do it again, I wouldn't have tried to build a studio to record. This is when I was producing. So this is way before I was mastering and producing and mixing. I would have built a miniature Airstream with built-in speakers and all the fixins so that I could go to locations and set up and say, hey, we're going to record in this log cabin, and I've got my control room with me. Or, hey, I'm going to go record this band at a live show, because you can punch above your weight if you've got an amazing portable setup like that, where if you can say to an amazing band that would never think about hiring you because you're young, hey, I've got a really great live recording system. Let me come record your band live. And if I mess up, who cares? It doesn't hurt you guys. You're not wasting your time. You're still playing the show. So yeah, plus I love Airstreams. So
I like that. There's a lot of fun to having a portable studio too, because you kind of get out of your one space. You get to go out and experience different things. It's a great ear training tool because you're hearing microphones in different spaces all the time.
Yeah.
And if your control room situation is always, the same, it's like your benchmark, then you know that what you're hearing is the sound of that space. It's a little trickier if you're taking a portable studio and you're always setting up your control room in a new space.
Yeah.
Because that can change as well. But that's great. That's cool advice. Now, what about, so finding people again is finding the bands that are performing, and making ends meet is not spending too much building out a massive studio, but getting paid to record the live gigs.
Yeah. I think, man, if I could do that again when I was 20 years old, I'm 34 now, that would have been a pretty cool living. Okay,
so you can just riff this one, but if you were going to take out some ads to reach people and let them know about your service, what would be a couple of basic, Facebook tweakage, audience tweakage things that you would put in there to reach those bands playing shows in your local area?
So aiming at, you're talking about sort of I run a small, my name is Bob.
Portable studio. Yeah. For
my portable studio.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So that's a good question. What I would do, well,
the bands might like those clubs that they're playing at, right? They might like their Facebook pages.
They might like those clubs. If they like Gibson, Fender, Ludwig, I would basically look for people who had liked maybe different brands of music equipment. Mm-hmm. That would be a pretty good, if someone likes Gibson, you probably play out.
Right.
Not a whole lot of people, are going to spend the money on a Gibson and not use it occasionally. So that would be a great way. What I'm talking about is targeting.
Yeah.
So if you're going to set an ad up, you want to target the right person.
Mm-hmm.
So that would definitely be a thing I would do. The geo-targeting, obviously, to say, hey, only run these ads to people that are within 5 miles of ABC location.
Right.
So that's pretty easy to do, and it's so cheap when you're targeting a small location like that. But again, I think when you're focusing on local, I think that sort of the ideas that we talked about earlier are probably better than internet marketing. That stereo idea that you did, where multiple bands came in and performed for each other, and you recorded the whole thing and videotaped it. I don't know that I've ever heard of a better idea to market a local studio.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And all it costs you, and I think this is the art of starting a business, is finding ways to market yourself that cost you very little, especially if it can just cost you time.
Yeah.
And that's a great example of you got the studio, you got the mics, you got the location. People want to hang out in a studio anyways. If you can give them an excuse to come over and show off what you got, and all it costs you is an evening, that's a great deal.
If you can make it sound great and it's just live to 2-track, you just imagine what you could do if you spent more time making the full record.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say that to people repeatedly.
Yeah.
Just imagine what I could do with multi-track recording.
All right, great. So now here's the whop doozy of a question. We're going to take the Wayback Studio time machine now. And Chris, you're going to go back and you're going to find young Chris. What was it? 1989, the 90s, wherever you were at that time, where you were maybe just still playing some music and thinking about what it would be like to record with more than a 4-track, for example. And you're going to tap yourself on the shoulder, and young Chris will turn around and be like, what are you doing here, dude? But you're going to say, well, I've come all this way to give you some advice. I want to tell you, this is the single most important thing you need to know if you want to be a recording studio rock star one day.
I would quote Mark, what's the guy's name? He wrote Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn.
Mark Twain.
Mark Twain. I'd quote Mark Twain, and I would say, don't let your schooling get in the way of your education.
Nice, man. I like that.
And would basically be like, dude, stop watching MacGyver reruns and read a few books. Here's a couple. That's the crazy thing is, like, there are books, I know they're out there right now, that in 50 years, I'm going to say, dang it, if only I had read that book when I was 34. And I'm just trying to keep that from happening as much as I can, and much to my benefit as a business owner.
Yes, indeed. Well, Chris, these are awesome answers. Thank you so much for joining us on Recording Studio Rockstars and giving so much of your time and spirit and great advice. How can our listeners find you, learn more about you, get in touch with you?
If you go to chrisgrahammastering.com, GRAHAM, just like the cracker, there's all sorts of resources on there. There's that before and after player that lets you hear some of my work in real time.
Coolest thing
unmastered, ever. Yeah, unmastered, mastered. And if you go on there, there's an option to send me a song to have me master a sample of it for free. So I would say that's probably the best thing to do if you're trying to. Honestly, on the webpage, I explain this. Like, if you're thinking about hiring a professional mastering engineer, find a few of them that will do the free sample, and that's not hard to do. There's a lot of them, and send the song to a few different mastering engineers, and get a sample back, and then compare and see which one you like the best. And you're going to learn an awful lot about a mastering engineer on that. Do they email you back when you email them? Does their work sound good? Do they like compression too much? Stuff like that. So have a contest. And that's a great way to get to know me or any other mastering engineer.
Well, that's cool. Well, Chris, again, thank you so much, man. Really a pleasure hanging out with you.
Yeah, you too, man.
I and the Rockstars greatly appreciate you joining us, man.
It's my pleasure. I had a blast.
Well, I look forward to meeting you in person, and we'll see you around the studio in the meantime.
Right on, man. Take it easy.
Cheers.
See ya.
Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, please leave a rating and review on iTunes to help reach more people. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to recordingstudiorockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And if you want more free content, all you have to do is text RS Rockstars to 33444. Again, that's RS Rockstars to 33444, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, and podcast updates. And I'll let you know about any upcoming giveaway offers, all totally free. Thanks for listening. I'm Lij Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music.